Hey guys! So today you and I are going to talk about unit tests. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, do you feel written unit tests serve as a good regression test suite? Depends on the unit test, I would say. I actually had this talk yesterday with a few of my teammates where we've had a issue, or a fairly long-running issue, with regression problems and stability issues related to our release processes and so forth and so forth. And our QAs have been sort of dreading increasing release velocity, and because basically I've been putting a little bit of pressure and said that I've said that the current lead times that we have is a little bit too long. It takes much longer than what we want to release something into production, and that of course means that the QA feels a little bit of stress because the team has gotten into this habit of where the developers, which is something you should watch out for, the developers do some coding on their side and then they throw it over the wall, and then now it's the QA's job basically to figure out if everything is working or not. And at the same time, these software developers don't really write any unit tests. Now, the problem is that when I've talked to them about it and I said that this is something that they should do, they express very accurately that, well, yeah, we need to write unit tests, right? But a lot of the stuff is, we don't really have to test if a controller is doing something. It's like if it's logic, otherwise we don't have to test it. And then I say, well, I have checked the repo, and there is not a single unit test in the code, or like in the test folder, for about the oldest one is from 2 years ago. So you're telling me that in the 2 years that this product has lived, since, well, way before I started, there has not been a single regression or single bug or anything like that related to the code. Now I know for a fact that that is not the case. And so they accurately say, well, yeah, but that's not necessarily something that has to do with unit testing. No, that is true. But the thing is that if you create a habit around not writing unit tests, you won't get any practice. It's like I like to tell people that it's sort of like parents or forcing their kids to brush their teeth or clean their room, or people going to the gym. There are more people who own gym membership cards who say that they're going to work out, every so often or when they have time, but there's not that many people who actually are fit. Because if you don't build a habit around the thing you're doing and you do it in a wishy-washy way, it's very likely that you're going to stop doing it. And so that's why I tell people, because I do talk to people a lot about testing in some cases, and it's not because I want to, it's because because I'm not really much of it takes extra time, etc. So it's a cost you don't really want to pay. But the reality is that if we were in this scenario want to increase our velocity and we want to have greater security within our system, we need to be able to do this, and we need not just to do it, we need to be good at doing it. Because the problem with unit testing, and I've had this conversation, this is extremely true for the front-end developers, they literally suck at it. And you see, the thing is, a poorly written test, and that's not a test that isn't, because that's the feedback that I got from in this case these were backend developers, and they said, I don't see any reason to test for example the endpoints of my API. And I said, well, so a few of the bugs that we've had has been due to breaking changes. So I agree, maybe you don't necessarily have to test that, I don't know, a controller gets hit with a certain network call and then a function gets called, which is your service layer or something like that. But what you should be testing is that your contract is intact. And they go, oh yeah, but that's more of a integration test. Yeah. Are you using those? No, of course not. And that's my problem. That's the problem, where unit tests, this is why there's something we call the testing pyramid. If it doesn't matter if you write unit tests, integration tests, if you use visual regression tests, if you use end-to-end tests, that it's all besides the point. If you don't have people who understand two things basically. Number one, what is the feature about? What is the desired outcome? If you don't understand the domain or what you're trying to achieve, you can't write a good unit test, because that's usually what very bad developers who are really bad at writing unit tests, they write code and then they write a test that just checks that their code is doing whatever the code is doing, but they're not actually writing a test that validates that the feature is working correctly, which is a big difference, and that nuance is very difficult for a lot of software developers to figure out. And that brings us to the second point. They don't actually write a test that asserts the thing that might go wrong. So an example would be, as you were saying, oh yeah, like, but I can write a test. It's pointless to write a test that just tests if a function is called. Yeah, it is really pretty pointless if you only care about what a certain function gets called, but the function itself, then the business logic that it is executing, and the fact that it persists the state to the database correctly, and that the endpoint is there, and as I said, the contract, like for a classic one is like, I have to this day never seen a software team that by default makes sure that their API specification actually is part of their testing process, because that's what we call a contract test. So if you, and this is what usually happens, software developers, they change the API without thinking about it, push it into production, and now they have a breaking change for the downstream systems. And that can be fixed by them simply making sure that their API spec is running towards the endpoint, and that the serialized, like the JSON representation of what or whatever they're using of their response from their endpoint actually is the thing that they are expecting. Nobody does that, or very few do it by default. And this is what I'm talking about. That's more important, to have developers who understand, how do I assert that the system is working? It doesn't matter if it's a unit test, an integration test, or if it's whatever. The purpose of a test is to assert that the feature is expecting as intended. And developers who don't practice that mindset and figure out, all right, these are the things that I have to check so that they don't fail, doesn't matter if they write unit tests or not, because they are just going to fill up the whole code base with unit tests that do some arbitrary thing. And it's especially true if they're bad at it. Like, my favorite one is that you see people write tests that are complete, like they're basically just checking something completely arbitrary, has no impact whatsoever, or like they mock things to a point where they're basically testing their own mocks. That's a no value test. It doesn't check anything meaningful, and that's why the practicing of unit testing starts out with people writing really shitty tests, and that's the half of the problem. But the other part, which is the true solution to this, is, as I've said, you have to practice it. That's one part, but you also have to understand the features, and you have to be product minded, because if you're just a code monkey, your test will basically always suck. So what I want you to take away from this is that unit tests are a way. It's a good way to check for regressions, end-to-end test, because it depends on what type of regression you're looking for. I like to tell developers that the goal is to get as close as possible to the thing that can fail. In other words, end-to-end test is, for example, a very good way to check if the overall system is working, but it's a really shitty way to figure out if there's a bug somewhere in the code. And the closer you can get to where the bug might be found, and that's a layered thing. Unit test is the lowest level, where your logic might be flawed, or you might do something incorrect in an incorrect fashion. That's a very good test to write if you have logic that might be fairly sophisticated. But if the problem might be that, I don't know, you might have a database schema or something or an API schema or something like that changes involuntarily, then you have to kick it up a level. You have to go up a level from the unit test into doing an actual integration test. It really comes down to you figuring out where are these weak spots in your design, what your system might actually do incorrectly. And that requires a software developer who understands product development and understands how the system is intended to work. How is the feature intended to work? Because anybody can write a unit test that does absolutely nothing. So that's my point. Might take these things away from this. You want to get good at writing good regression tests, regardless of if it's unit tests or whatever it is. Number one, make sure that you understand what the feature is about and which sort of test is necessary to assert that that thing is working, and then practice writing tests, because everybody sucks at it at first, but the better you get at it, the less of these like arbitrary silly tests that you might actually not need you will have less of those, and you will have fewer tests, but they will be valuable tests that actually capture things that will break if you're not careful. Have a great day.